The transport shuttle descended through the atmospheric shield of Station Kepler-22, and Lieutenant Sarah Chen pressed her face against the viewport to catch her first glimpse of the Galactic Defense Academy. The station sprawled across the void like a metallic city, its towers and training facilities gleaming under the light of 3 distant stars. Sarah had dreamed of this moment for 2 years, ever since Earth had been accepted into the Galactic Council and the exchange program was announced. She was the first human to attend the Academy, the most prestigious military institution in known space. The shuttle docked with a gentle thud, and Sarah gathered her belongings. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. The airlock hissed open, and she stepped into a corridor filled with beings she had only seen in holographic briefings. A towering creature with 4 arms and crystalline skin strode past her without a glance, too. 2 smaller beings that resembled walking plants chittered to each other in a language that sounded like wind through leaves. Sarah made her way to the assembly hall, following the directions on her datapad. The hall was massive, easily capable of holding thousands. Rows of seats descended toward a central platform where several figures stood waiting. Sarah found a seat near the back and sat down, trying to make herself small among the giants and warriors that filled the space around her. A being that looked like an upright bear made of rock settled into the seat beside her, the metal groaning under its weight. It glanced at her with eyes like smoldering coals and snorted, a sound that might have been laughter or disdain. The lights dimmed, and a figure stepped forward on the platform. Colonel Vexstar was exactly as imposing as the briefings had suggested. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming blue-black under the lights. 4 arms crossed over his chest, each ending in blade-like appendages that served as natural weapons. His people, the Crithians, were legendary warriors who had never lost a war in their 3,000-year recorded history. Warriors of the Galactic Defense Academy, Vexstar's voice boomed through the hall without need of amplification. You have been selected from billions of candidates across hundreds of worlds. You represent the finest your species has to offer. You are the strongest, the fastest, the most capable fighters your civilizations have produced. His multifaceted eyes swept across the assembled students, and Sarah felt the weight of that gaze when it passed over her section. This year we have expanded our enrollment, Vexstar continued, and something in his tone made Sarah's stomach tighten. The Galactic Council, in its wisdom, has mandated that we accept students from newly inducted species. Among you sits a human. The word landed like a stone in still water. Heads turned, bodies shifted, and Sarah felt hundreds of eyes seeking her out. She kept her gaze fixed on the colonel, refusing to shrink under the attention. Humans, Vexstar said, his mandibles clicking in what Sarah had learned was the Crithian equivalent of a dismissive laugh, evolved on a paradise world. Their planet has comfortable temperatures, abundant oxygen, and gentle gravity. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced senses. They are, by every measurable standard, the weakest species to ever grace these halls. Laughter rippled through the assembly, not cruel but casual, the way one might laugh at an absurd joke. Sarah's jaw clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. She had known this would not be easy. I will be honest, Vexstar continued. I oppose this decision. War is not a place for the soft, the weak, for those who grew up in comfort. But the Council has spoken, and so we will observe this experiment. Perhaps we will all learn something. His tone made it clear what he expected them to learn. The assembly continued with administrative details, schedule information, and safety protocols. Sarah barely heard any of it. Her mind was already working, analyzing, planning. She had not come here to fail. She had not fought her way through Earth's selection process, through the prejudices of her own military leadership, who thought she was too small, too young, too female, just to wash out in the first week. When the assembly ended, Sarah was assigned to Delta Squadron. She reported to the barracks and found her bunk, a small space in a room designed for beings of vastly different sizes and needs. Her squad mates arrived gradually throughout the evening. There was Krazov, a being from a heavy-gravity world, who stood 7 feet tall, and whose muscles seemed carved from stone. His skin was thick and gray, and when he moved, the floor vibrated slightly under his weight. He looked at Sarah's bunk, then at Sarah, and snorted. "The human," he said, his voice like grinding rocks. "I heard about you. Try not to die in training, yes? It would be embarrassing for everyone." He laughed, and moved to claim the largest bunk in the room. Others introduced themselves, or ignored her entirely. By evening, Sarah understood the social structure clearly. Krazov was the apex student, the one others deferred to. He had never lost a combat trial in 3 semesters. His people were conquerors, warriors who lived for battle. The others in Delta Squadron were similarly impressive. Tekresh, an insectoid species with lightning reflexes. Merlon, a being whose body could shift density at will. Zandrai, who possessed natural camouflage. Venomous quills. Sarah was the smallest, the slowest, the weakest, by every obvious measure. That night, lying in her bunk, while alien sounds filled the darkness around her, Sarah accessed her personal datapad. She pulled up the training schedule and began to memorize it. Then, she opened the files on each of her squad mates, studying their species, their capabilities, their documented weaknesses. Knowledge was a weapon. Patience was armor. And humans, whatever Colonel Vexstar believed, were very good at both. She had 30 days until the first combat evaluations. 30 days to prove that strength was not just about how hard you could hit. 30 days to show them what a persistence predator could do when underestimated. Sarah closed her eyes and let her breathing slow, falling into the meditation techniques that had been passed down through generations of human warriors. Around her, the other students slept the sleep of this. Confident. Sarah rested like prey that had learned to hunt. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. The alarm shrieked through the barracks at what Sarah's internal clock registered as 4 in the morning. Around her, the other students of Delta Squadron rose with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Krazov was already on his feet, his massive frame casting shadows in the dim lighting as he performed what looked like ritual combat movements. Sarah rolled out of her bunk and dressed quickly in the Academy's standard training uniform, a form-fitting suit that adjusted to different body types. The material felt strange against her skin, neither warm nor cold, and it seemed to move with her rather than restrict her. The first training session took place in Gymnasium 7, a vast space with adjustable gravity and atmospheric controls. Colonel Vexstar stood at the center, his forearms crossed, his expression unreadable behind his alien features. "Strength assessment," he announced as the squadrons assembled. "You will lift the mass appropriate for your species baseline. Then we will see who exceeds expectations." One by one, students approached the testing apparatus. The machine adjusted for each species, calculating their world's gravity and their body composition. Krazov lifted nearly 3 times his body weight, his muscles barely straining, and the crowd of students murmured appreciation. Tekresh managed twice her weight with her multiple limbs. Even Zandri, whose species was not known for strength, exceeded his baseline by a respectable margin. Sarah's turn came, and she approached the machine. It calibrated for human parameters, and a weight appeared that she knew she could manage. She lifted it cleanly, meeting her baseline exactly. Precisely average, Vexstar's voice carried across the gymnasium. How remarkably unremarkable. Laughter followed, and Sarah set the weight down without comment. The pattern continued through the morning. Various gravity conditions showed Sarah consistently in the middle of the pack at best. In Earth normal gravity, she was merely adequate. In the high gravity settings preferred by species like Krazoths, she struggled. In low gravity environments, others who had evolved for different conditions easily outpaced her. "The human performs as expected," Vexstar announced during a break. "Consistent mediocrity. On a battlefield, mediocrity means death." He turned to address Sarah directly. "Tell me, Lieutenant Chen, what predators did your species face during your evolution?" Sarah met his multifaceted gaze. "We were the predators, Colonel." Vexstar's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Predators without claws, without fangs, without venom or armor? How did you catch your prey when you are so slow?" "We ran them to exhaustion," Sarah said quietly. "Persistence hunting." "Ah yes," Vexstar turned to address the assembled students. "The human hunting method. Chase an animal for hours until it collapses from heat exhaustion. How very efficient when one has the luxury of time and no actual threats." More laughter, and this time Sarah caught Krazoth's expression. The big warrior was grinning, clearly enjoying the spectacle. The afternoon brought academic sessions, and here Sarah found her footing. Tactical analysis, pattern recognition, strategic planning, these were areas where humans excelled. When presented with a complex battle scenario involving multiple variables and unpredictable elements, Sarah's solution was both elegant and effective. "Overthinking," Vexstar commented when she presented her strategy. "In real combat, you do not have time for elaborate plans. You act on instinct, on strength, on the advantages your evolution provided. The human approach is interesting for a classroom, but it would fail in actual warfare." Despite the colonel's dismissal, Sarah noticed several students reviewing her tactical breakdown later. Ideas were weapons too, even if Vexstar refused to acknowledge it. Days became weeks, and the pattern solidified. Physical training showed Sarah as competent but unremarkable. She could not match the raw power of the heavy worlders, the speed of the quick species, or the endurance of those who evolved in harsh environments. Vexstar used her as a teaching example repeatedly. "Note how the human tires quickly in high-gravity combat. Observe how her reaction time lags behind species with proper neural evolution. See how she lacks any natural defensive capabilities." Krazoth began actively taunting her during drills. When she struggled with a climbing exercise, he scaled the same wall in half the time using only his legs, his arms crossed mockingly. When she completed an obstacle course, he would run it backward while carrying extra weight. "The weak human," he would say, loud enough for others to hear, "so brave to come here where she does not belong." Perhaps the Academy should create a special, easier course for soft species. Sarah absorbed it all silently. She watched, she learned, she adapted. At night, when the others slept off their exertions, Sarah reviewed footage of training sessions. She studied movement patterns, analyzed behavioral responses, cataloged the ways different species approached combat. She noticed that Krazoth always led with his right side, that Tukresh had slightly slower reactions after rapid movement, that Merlon's density shifting had a brief delay when transitioning states. Knowledge accumulated like water behind a dam. 3 weeks into the semester, Sarah began training alone after hours. She requisitioned time in the smaller auxiliary gymnasiums when they were empty. There, without audience or commentary, she ran. Humans were not sprinters by nature, not compared to species that had evolved to flee predators in sudden bursts. But humans could run for hours, maintaining a steady pace that would kill most species through heat exhaustion or cardiovascular failure. Sarah ran laps until her body found its rhythm, until her breathing became meditation, until the act of persistent motion was as natural as thought. She practiced movements from Earth's martial arts, techniques developed over thousands of years of humans fighting other humans. Joint locks, throws, strikes designed for precision rather than power. One night, Xandri found her in the auxiliary gym. The camouflaged being watched silently for several minutes before speaking. "You train differently when alone," Xandri observed. "Most species train hardest when others watch. You train hardest when no one sees. My people have a saying, the loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room." Xandri's quills rippled in what might have been amusement. "Colonel Vexthar is very loud about human weakness," she said. "Yes," Sarah agreed, "he is." "The quarterly evaluations approach," Xandri said. "There will be combat trials." "I know," Sarah responded. "Krazoth has never lost," Xandri added. Sarah resumed her practice, flowing through a series of movements that would have looked like dance to the uninitiated. "Everyone loses eventually," she said. Xandri left without another word, but Sarah sensed something had shifted. The next morning, Vexthar made an announcement. "Quarterly evaluations will commence in 1 week," he declared. "You will face opponents in single combat. The matches have been determined by skill assessment and tactical interest." His gaze found Sarah in the assembled crowd. "Lieutenant Chen will face Krazoth in the final match. It will be educational for all to see the difference between evolutionary success and evolutionary compromise." The gymnasium erupted in excited chatter. Krazoth laughed, a sound like falling stones. Sarah simply nodded once. 1 week. She had 1 week to prepare for a fight against an opponent who outweighed her by 100 pounds, who could lift 3 times what she could lift, who had never been defeated. 1 week to prove that Colonel Vexar's understanding of strength was dangerously incomplete. That night, Sarah requested access to the Academy's Death World simulation chamber. The request was logged and approved within an hour. Vexthar himself had authorized it, probably amused at the humans' desperation. The simulation chamber could recreate the conditions of the most hostile planets in known space. Sarah programmed it for Earth parameters and stepped inside. Human. Time to remember what apex predators really looked like. The Death World simulation chamber hummed to life around Sarah, and suddenly she was home. The air gained the particular quality of Earth atmosphere, that specific mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, with traces of carbon dioxide and water vapor. The gravity settled into the comfortable embrace of 1G, and the temperature stabilized at 22 degrees Celsius. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders ease. The chamber's computer spoke in a neutral voice. "Earth environmental parameters loaded. Warning, this simulation includes conditions classified as Class 9 Death World. Extreme weather variability, high concentration oxygen environment, persistent microbial threats, and apex predator scenarios are active. Do you wish to continue?" "Yes," Sarah said. The simulation began. Rain materialized from nowhere, not the gentle precipitation of controlled environments, but the violent downpour of a tropical storm. Wind picked up, carrying the ozone smell of lightning strikes. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in as many seconds. Sarah started running. Not the careful, measured pace she used in the Academy's controlled gymnasiums, but the loping stride her ancestors had used to chase game across endless savannas. Her body remembered this, encoded in genes and muscle memory. The simulation threw challenges at her. Uneven terrain that required constant balance adjustment, temperature swings from freezing to scorching, sudden obstacles that demanded instant reaction. Through it all, Sarah ran. Her breathing found its rhythm. Her heart rate settled into a sustainable tempo. Sweat evaporated efficiently from her skin, one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. Most species in the galaxy could not regulate their temperature through perspiration. They overheated quickly, had to stop, had to rest. Humans could run through heat that would kill others. After an hour, Sarah's body hit the threshold where most Academy species would have collapsed. She kept running. After 2 hours, she had entered the state her people called runner's high. Endorphins flooded her system, pain became distant, and her mind achieved crystalline clarity. She ran until the 3-hour mark, then stopped. Not because she had to, but because she had proven her point to herself. Earth had not made humans weak. Earth had made humans relentless. Sarah spent the next hour in the chamber, working through combat scenarios. The simulation provided virtual opponents based on known species physiology. She fought Crithian warriors, heavy world brutes, quick-strike predators. Every opponent was stronger than her, faster in short bursts, more naturally armed. Sarah lost most of these simulated fights at first, but she learned. From each loss, she discovered that strength meant nothing if you could not land a blow. That speed was useless if it left you overextended and off balance. That natural weapons were liabilities if someone knew how to redirect them. She began winning, not through overwhelming force, but through patience and precision. A joint lock here, a thrown opponent there, a strike to vulnerable sensory organs timed perfectly. The simulation's computer noted her progress without emotion. Combat efficiency improving. Adaptation rate exceeds baseline predictions for human physiology. Warning: current training intensity approaches dangerous levels. Sarah ignored the warning and continued. Over the next 6 days, she divided her time between normal academy training and her private sessions in the Death World chamber. During official training, she maintained her image as the struggling human, adequate but unremarkable. Continued his commentary. The human tries hard, which is admirable in a pet. But trying hard does not overcome biological limitation. Krasoth grew more confident with each passing day. During a grappling exercise, he lifted Sarah completely off the ground with one hand and held her there while speaking to another student. See how light the human is? Like a child, this will not be a fight. It will be a demonstration. Sarah did not struggle in his grip. She simply memorized the way his fingers positioned, the angle of his wrist, the distribution of his weight. When he set her down, dismissing her entirely, she filed the information away. At night, in the simulation chamber, Sarah studied footage of Krasoth's previous fights. The Academy maintained records of all combat trials, and she had access to 3 semesters of Krasoth's matches. She watched each one multiple times, sometimes at normal speed, sometimes slowed down to catch details. Patterns emerged. Krasoth always opened with overwhelming aggression, using his size and strength to intimidate and dominate immediately. He had never needed a second strategy because the first one always worked. His defense was almost non-existent, not because he was careless, but because he had never needed to defend. No opponent had ever survived his initial assault. To counter-attack, he dropped his left side slightly when preparing his strongest right-hand strike. He pivoted always to his dominant side, never comfortable with leftward movement. After a successful hit, he would pause for a fraction of a second, basking in the impact. These were tiny things, meaningless against most opponents. Against someone who was looking for them, they were fatal flaws. Sarah programmed the simulation to create a virtual Krasoth based on the combat footage. She fought him again and again, lost the first 20 matches, started winning by the 40th. By the 100th simulation, she could defeat virtual Krasoth 9 times out of 10. The key was never meeting his strength directly. Let him commit to strikes that missed by inches, use his momentum against him, redirecting rather than blocking. Target the joints, the balance points, the vulnerabilities that existed in any bipedal form. And most importantly, be patient. Let him tire himself with his aggression while she conserved energy. Humans were persistence predators. They did not need to win in the first minute. They just needed to still be fighting when their opponent's endurance failed. 2 days before the match, Xandri approached Sarah in the dining facility. The camouflaged being sat down across from her without invitation. "There is betting on your match with Krazoth," Xandri said quietly. "The odds are not favorable to you." "I would expect not," Sarah replied, focusing on her meal. "Some bet you will last 30 seconds before submission. Others think you will forfeit rather than face injury. A few believe you might survive a full minute." Sarah looked up. "What do you believe?" Xandri's quills rippled. "I believe you have been training in ways others do not see. I believe you understand something about combat that Krazoth does not. And I believe tomorrow will be interesting." The next day passed in a blur of standard training. Sarah performed adequately, as expected. She could feel the anticipation building among the other students. The match between the undefeated champion and the weak human had become a source of entertainment. Some viewed it as cruel, forcing such an obvious mismatch. Most viewed it as educational, a clear demonstration of why biological advantages mattered. Vexthar viewed it as vindication. That evening, Sarah returned to her bunk early. She did not train, did not study, did not review footage. Instead, she lay on her bunk and controlled her breathing, letting her heart rate slow, allowing her body to rest completely. Tomorrow would require everything she had, not just physical capability, but mental clarity and emotional control. Around her, the barracks buzzed with conversation. Krazoth held court in the common area, demonstrating the strike he planned to use to end the fight immediately. His laughter boomed through the space. Sarah closed her eyes and visualized the match, not hoping for victory, but seeing it, knowing it, understanding exactly how the next day would unfold. Humans had conquered Earth not because they were the strongest, or fastest, or most dangerous in any single category. They had conquered Earth because they were the most adaptable, the most persistent, the most capable of learning from observation. Tomorrow, Colonel Vexthar would learn what that really meant. Tomorrow, Krazoth would understand why humans did not need claws or armor. Tomorrow, the undefeated champion would hit the ground, and Sarah would still be standing. She fell asleep with that certainty, her breathing slow and steady, the sleep of an apex predator. Learn to wait for exactly the right moment to strike. The combat arena filled with students and instructors from every squadron in the academy. Word had spread about the match, and what had started as a quarterly evaluation had become an event. The arena itself was a circular space, 50 meters in diameter, with a reinforced floor designed to handle beings of vastly different masses. Observation platforms ringed the upper levels, and every position was occupied. Sarah entered through the east gate, wearing the standard combat suit. The material clung to her frame, highlighting just how small she was compared to most beings present. A murmur ran through the crowd as she walked to the center. She could hear fragments of conversation. "So tiny. This is cruel. How long will she last? I give her 20 seconds. Colonel Vexthar stood on the primary observation platform, his 4 arms spread wide. Today we witness the quarterly combat evaluation, across the arena without amplification. These trials test not just physical capability, but tactical thinking, adaptability, and warrior spirit. His multifaceted eyes swept across the assembled audience. They also demonstrate an important truth about warfare, that biological advantages matter, that evolution shapes capability, that there are reasons certain species become warriors while others become scholars or diplomats. Sarah kept her expression neutral, her breathing steady. She had heard versions of this speech 100 times over the past weeks. Our final match pairs Krazoth, undefeated champion of Delta Squadron, against Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the human exchange student. The west gate opened, and Krazoth entered. He was massive, his gray skin gleaming under the arena lights. His muscles moved like steel cables under stone, and each step he took resonated through the floor. "Cheers." Krazoth raised his arms, acknowledging the support. He looked across the arena at Sarah and grinned, showing teeth like broken rock. The rules are simple, Vexthar continued. No weapons, no lethal force. Victory by submission or incapacitation. Medical teams stand ready. He paused, and Sarah caught something in his tone. Though I suspect this will be concluded quickly. Krazoth and Sarah moved to the center of the arena. Up close, the size difference was almost comical. Krazoth stood 7 feet tall and weighed perhaps 300 pounds. Sarah barely reached 6 feet and weighed 140. Try to make this interesting, human, Krazoth said, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. Give them a show before you quit. Sarah looked up at him, her expression calm. I will try. They moved to opposite sides of the starting circle. The arena's announcement system chimed. Combatants ready. Sarah settled into a loose stance, her weight balanced, her hands relaxed at her sides. Across from her, Krazoth dropped into a power stance, his massive frame coiled like a spring. Begin. Krazoth charged immediately. His strategy was what Sarah had expected. Overwhelming force from the opening second. He crossed the distance between them in 3 enormous strides, faster than something his size should have been able to move. His right arm came around in a haymaker that would have ended the fight if it connected. Sarah was not there. She moved laterally, not away, but at an angle, and Krazoth's fist passed through empty air. The crowd gasped, more in surprise than anything else. Krazoth spun faster than Sarah had seen in the recordings. He was adapting already, not underestimating her despite his words. His left hand came in low, aiming to grab rather than strike, pivoted on her back foot, letting the grab pass inches from her torso. She did not attack, did not counter, just evaded and reset. Krazoth came again, and this time there was no smile on his face. His strikes were faster now, more precise, a combination that would have overwhelmed most opponents. Sarah slipped the first strike, ducked the second, stepped inside the third. For a fraction of a second, she was inside Krazoth's guard. She could have struck then, targeted his throat or eyes. Instead, she pushed against his extended arm, using his own momentum to spin him slightly off balance. Then she was out of range again. The crowd's confusion was growing. This was not how fights worked. The smaller, weaker opponent was supposed to try desperately to land hits while defending. Sarah was not fighting. She was moving. Stand still, human, Krazoth growled. 15 seconds had elapsed. Krazoth changed tactics. He stopped trying to grab or strike cleanly, and instead threw his whole body into a charge. If he could get his hands on Sarah, the fight would be over. His mass and strength would make grappling impossible for her. Sarah waited until the last possible instant. Then she dropped low, far lower than Krazoth expected. His center of gravity was committed to the charge, and when Sarah swept his lead leg while simultaneously pushing against his hip, physics took over. Krazoth's eyes widened as he felt himself falling. He had never fallen in the arena, never been off his feet during a fight. He hit the ground hard, the impact resonating through the arena floor. The crowd went silent. Sarah did not press the advantage immediately. She stepped back, letting Krazoth rise, giving him the respect of a warrior, the chance to continue. Krazoth stood slowly, and Sarah saw the shift in his expression. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something dangerous. Focus. 22 seconds had elapsed. Krazoth came at her again, but this time with control. He was not underestimating her now. His strikes were measured, testing her defenses, looking for patterns. Sarah gave him nothing. She moved efficiently, never more than necessary. Every motion served a purpose. Every step positioned her for the next movement. Krazoth began to breathe harder. His strikes, while still powerful, were coming a fraction slower. Humans could see patterns, could predict, could adapt. Sarah had studied him for weeks. She knew his rhythms, his preferences, his unconscious tells. She knew he was about to commit to his power move, his strongest strike, the one that had ended most of his fights. He dropped his left shoulder slightly, shifted his weight. Sarah was already moving before the strike came. She stepped inside his guard as his right arm came around. This time, she did not just evade. She grabbed his wrist with both hands, turned her body, and used his own force against him. A throw called seoi-nage in the Japanese martial arts Earth had developed. Modified slightly for Krazoth's physiology, for his center of gravity and joint structure. Krazoth went over Sarah's hip and hit the ground again, harder this time. Before he could recover, Sarah was on him. A joint lock, precisely applied to his elbow. Pressure at exactly the angle his species' joints were weakest. She had studied the anatomy, had practiced the position 100 times in simulation. "Submit," Sarah said quietly. Krazoth struggled, and Sarah applied more pressure. Not enough to break, but enough to make it clear that she could. Repeated, and then the arena was absolutely silent. Everyone watching understood what they were seeing. The undefeated champion was on the ground. The weak human had put him there. 32 seconds had elapsed. "I submit," Krazoth said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. Sarah released the lock immediately and stood. She offered her hand to Krazoth. For a moment, he just stared at it. Then he took it, and Sarah helped him to his feet. The crowd erupted, but Sarah could not tell if it was cheers or shock. She looked up at the observation platform, where Colonel Vexthar stood. The Crithian's mandibles hung open, his forearms slack at his sides. He looked like someone had just explained that gravity was optional. Sarah bowed to Krazoth, a gesture of respect between warriors. Krazoth stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he returned the bow. The arena filled with sound again, voices, raised in 100 different languages. But Sarah barely heard it. She had not come here to prove she was the strongest. She had come to prove that strength was not the only thing that mattered. Mission accomplished. She walked toward the exit, her body already processing the adrenaline, her mind already moving forward. Behind her, Krazoth stood in the center of the arena. For the first time in his life, the champion had lost, and he was learning what that meant. Sarah made it halfway to the exit, before Colonel Vexthar's voice stopped her. "Lieutenant Chen," he said. His tone was different from every other time he had addressed her. No mockery, no dismissal, just uncertainty. Sarah turned and saw Vexthar descending from the observation platform. The crowd parted for him, students and instructors alike, moving aside as the colonel made his way to the arena floor. He stopped a few meters from Sarah, his forearms held stiffly at his sides. "Explain what just happened," he said. It was not a request, but neither was it an order. It was the question of someone whose understanding of the universe had just been challenged. Sarah glanced at Krazoth, who still stood at the center of the arena. The big warrior was rubbing his elbow, his expression thoughtful, rather than angry. "I used his strength against him," Sarah said simply. "His strength," Vexthar repeated, "I have been teaching about for 3 weeks. Strength is an advantage, only if you can apply it," Sarah replied. "Krazoth is stronger than me, faster in short bursts, more durable. But those advantages require him to connect, to make contact, to engage in the way he prefers." She gestured at the arena floor. "I did not fight his fight. I fought mine." Vexthar's mandibles clicked slowly. "You evaded, you redirected, you waited. You did not attempt to match his strengths." "No," Sarah agreed, "because that would have been foolish." A ripple of conversation ran through the watching students. What Sarah was saying was obvious now that they had seen it, but it challenged everything Vexthar had been teaching. On your world, Vexstar said slowly. You spoke of persistence hunting, chasing prey until it collapsed. Yes. Show me. The request surprised Sarah. Vexstar moved to a control panel and activated one of the arena's displays. A holographic projection appeared, showing a predator from Vexstar's homeworld. It was massive, armored, with claws like swords. This is a Karneth, Vexstar said, the apex predator of Krithia. Fast, strong, nearly indestructible. It hunts by overwhelming its prey in seconds. How would a human hunt this creature? Sarah studied the hologram. We would not hunt it directly. We would track it, follow it from a distance, never engaging. We would pursue it for hours, through terrain where our endurance mattered more than its strength. We would not let it rest, not let it recover. Eventually, it would overheat, its muscles would fail from extended exertion. Then, when it could no longer fight, we would approach. The arena had gone quiet again. Every student was listening. You would run it to death, Vexstar said, without ever fighting it directly. Yes. That seems inefficient. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. It seems inefficient until you realize that the Karneth died without ever landing a blow, that no human was injured in the hunt, that strength and claws and armor were useless against an opponent that never came close enough to engage. She paused, then continued, Colonel, you have been teaching that biological advantages determine combat outcomes. You are right, but incomplete. Advantages only matter if the combat happens on your terms. Vexstar was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the entire arena. I have been a warrior for 30 years. I have taught at this academy for 10. I believed I understood combat. He turned to face the assembled students. I was wrong. A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Not admit errors, especially not publicly. I measured the human by Krithian standards, by heavy world warrior standards, by the metrics of species who win through direct application of superior physiology. I failed to understand that humans won their world through different means. He looked back at Sarah. Your species did not need to be the strongest because you learned to make strength irrelevant. You did not need to be the fastest because you learned to outlast rather than outrun. You did not need natural weapons because you learned to turn any environment, any opponent, into a weapon. Sarah felt something shift in the atmosphere of the arena. Students were looking at her differently now, not with dismissal or pity, but with curiosity, with respect. Krazoth approached, moving slowly. Up close, Sarah could see that his pride had taken more damage than his body. I have never lost, he said quietly. Thought that made me strong. You are strong, Sarah replied, stronger than me by any physical measure. But you relied only on that strength. Krazoth nodded slowly. When you did not fight the way I expected, I did not know how to adapt. I became frustrated, aggressive, predictable. Yes, I would like to learn, Krazoth said, to fight as you fight, to understand this different kind of strength. Before Sarah could respond, Xandrai spoke up from the crowd. The human's combat style should be studied. Agreed, said Merlon. I wish to understand how to fight opponents who are stronger. That knowledge would be valuable. Takresh clicked her mandibles in assent. The human has shown us a new perspective. Vexstar raised one of his forearms. Lieutenant Chen, you said your species evolved to be persistence predators. Hunters who succeeded through endurance and adaptation. Yes, Colonel. Then teach us, Vexstar said. Show this academy what it means to fight as a human fights. Sarah blinked in surprise. Colonel, I am a student here. You are, Vexstar agreed, and also, clearly, a teacher. I am assigning you as a combat consultant. You will maintain your student status and training, but you will also lead seminars on human combat methodology. He paused, and his mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. It appears the Academy has much to learn from Earth. Over the following days, Sarah's life at the Academy transformed. She still attended regular training, still participated in the grueling physical exercises. But now, 3 evenings a week, she taught. The first seminar was attended by Delta Squadron and a handful of curious students from other units. Sarah taught them the basic principle, that combat was not about being stronger, but about making your strengths relevant and your opponent's strengths irrelevant. She demonstrated joint locks, throws, and strikes designed for precision rather than power. She explained concepts from human martial arts, yielding to redirect force, using angles and leverage, targeting vulnerabilities. By the second week, the seminar had to be moved to a larger space. By the 4th week, even instructors were attending. Sarah discovered that teaching forced her to articulate principles she had absorbed instinctively. The mental exercise of breaking down technique made her own skills sharper. Krasoth became her most dedicated student. The big warrior attended every seminar and asked to practice with Sarah during free periods. "I spent my life believing strength was everything," he told her during one session. "Now I must relearn combat from the beginning. It is humbling, but necessary." Footwork, on patience, on reading opponents. Slowly, Krasoth's style evolved. He was still powerful, but now that power was controlled, precise, deployed strategically rather than constantly. 6 weeks after the match, Krasoth faced another opponent in a standard evaluation. He won, but not in his usual fashion. Instead of overwhelming force from the opening second, he measured his opponent. He evaded, he redirected, he waited for the perfect moment. When he struck, it was decisive. After the match, Krasoth found Sarah. "I would not have won that way before," he said. "My old style would have failed against that opponent." "You are learning," Sarah replied. "We both are." Colonel Vexthar called Sarah to his office one evening. She entered to find him standing before a large display showing combat statistics. "I have been reviewing Academy records," he said without preamble. "Human martial arts have existed for thousands of years. Hundreds of distinct styles, all developed by humans fighting other humans." Sarah nodded. "Why was this not in the Galactic Combat Database?" Vexthar asked. "Because no one asked," Sarah replied. "When the Council evaluated Earth, they looked at our technology, our resources, our military capabilities. They did not think to study how we fought before we had weapons." Vexthar's mandibles clicked. "An oversight. One I am correcting." He gestured at the display, and Sarah saw that he had been cataloging human combat techniques. "I am recommending to the Academy Council that human combat methodology become part of the standard curriculum. All students should understand that strength has many forms." Sarah felt something swell in her chest. Pride, perhaps, or vindication. "Thank you, Colonel." "Do not thank me," Vexthar said. "I am correcting my own error. I judged your species by external measures and missed what made you truly dangerous." He turned to face her directly. "Humans are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most naturally armed. But you are perhaps the most adaptable. And in warfare, adaptability may be the most valuable trait of all." Sarah left the office and made her way back to the barracks. It was late, and most students were asleep. She sat at her bunk and pulled out her personal datapad. A message to Earth was long overdue. She typed quickly, keeping it brief. First month at the Academy was challenging. Faced significant bias and skepticism. Proved that human capabilities are underestimated. Currently, teaching alien students how we fight. Situation has improved significantly. Will send detailed reports soon. Chen. She sent the message and lay back on her bunk. Around her, alien beings slept. Some of them were now friends, training partners, students. All of them had learned that weakness and strength were not always what they appeared. Outside the barracks, Station Kepler 22 drifted through the void. Inside, a human rested. Not as prey, not as the weakest link, but as a teacher, as a warrior, as proof that evolution gave different species different tools, and that sometimes the smallest tool was the sharpest. Sarah closed her eyes and smiled. Tomorrow, she would teach another seminar. Tomorrow, more students would learn. Tomorrow, the galaxy would understand a little more about what it meant to be human. For now, she slept the sleep of someone who had proven a point. The rest of an apex predator, in a den full of creatures who had finally learned to respect the hunt.